Hey everybody, welcome back to Worst Case Macchiato. It is episode 4. How are you doing today, Madison?
Doing good. Tired, but good.
I feel
It's
that
early.
very early, but I like doing it in the morning because we have the rest of the day to do whatever we want.
Let's be real, it's not actually that early. We're just roughing it today.
That's fair. We were both up pretty late. Well, I worked last
Y-
night, but you were up pretty late.
Yeah, I was like after 2 in the morning. This weekend has just been a write-off because we worked late every day this weekend. So
That's fair. I was busy, busy, busy all weekend too, so
yeah, you came up and I didn't even see you.
yeah,
I was working.
well, I only saw like other than my dad and Melissa, like the only family members I saw was your dad and your mom, but that was because your dad was out helping my dad with cable.
Yeah, no, I knew I didn't know you were coming up. I knew Sav was coming up, but yeah,
Yeah,
my mom was like, yeah, Vanessa was there too. I was like, oh, cool.
yeah, it was a last minute decision, so
Yeah, I kind of figured it probably was.
yeah, because I think I only told my dad a couple days before, like we were leaving that I was going with her, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm going back down at the end of the month, so.
Well, let me know dates so I don't like book myself.
It's the 25th, 26th, 27th weekend.
Of course, and we have events, 2 events going that week.
But the thing is that I'm probably going to put in my last day at work on the 24th. So like I can extend as long as I want.
Fair enough. I literally work like day shifts with my main job, and then we have security stuff. But I'll just probably like be choosy on what I put in for that. Do you
Well,
want to get into it?
yeah. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So today, even though I said that I was debating on switching, I am doing Bloody Mary today. So typically when it comes to mirrors, there's a lot of different myths and legends when it comes to mirrors and how they work with the spiritual life. But the main one that kind of pertains to Bloody Mary and probably how it all originally started and how the urban myth kind of got started was that it was a ritual for young women to walk up a flight of stairs backwards, holding a candle and a handheld mirror while they're in a darkened house. And then whenever they would look into the mirror, they were supposed to be able to see a view of their future husband's face. So it was almost like you're figuring out what your future husband will look like. You know, like what he looks like for when you first meet him. But if they ever saw a skull or a face of the Grim Reaper, it indicated that they were going to die before they would marry.
I should maybe test this theory.
So, so the reason why I brought this little historical ritual up is because like a couple podcasts, because like I listened to multiple podcasts and then I watched a couple TV shows that had like Bloody Mary in it, and one of the podcasts said like when it comes to this historical ritual, like the person was bloody or like there was somebody behind them that was bloody, that is kind of like Bloody Mary.
Hmm.
But so I just thought that was important. But also with mirrors, people think that if you die in front of a mirror or if you carry a body in front of a mirror, like the body that's dead in front of a mirror, then it can, like the soul could be absorbed into the mirror and their soul kind of be trapped in it.
Hmm.
Um, which is like it's funny because when Abraham Lincoln died, apparently um they covered like all the mirrors all over the place when they were walking, like when they were carrying his body. So it was very ritualistic to always cover mirrors, and
Okay.
that's important for obviously Bloody Mary because it always pertains a mirror, and every single backstory usually resulted in one of these Marys dying in a mirror, in front of a mirror.
Hmm.
So like I don't know what it was like when where you were growing up, right, when it came to Bloody Mary, but what I remember happening, because like I only really heard it when I was like 10. I didn't really hear about it after that. Um but you would play it in a bathroom, either with candle lights or with a flashlight. You would spin around and say your name 3 times, and then she was supposed to come out of the mirror and scratch your eyes out. I don't know if that's the same there.
So for us, like um we would be like in the bathroom at school. This is crazy. Like we actually did this growing up. And we would be in the bathroom, obviously, like in front of the mirror, and we would shut the. Sorry, I have like alarms going off over here. Um, we would shut off like all the lights to the bathroom, and like someone would be constantly like flickering the lights and just yelling like and chanting Bloody Mary in the school bathroom. I would always just get the f out as quick as possible because like that shit always freaked me out and definitely not something that I wanted to be involved in, but it was like an everyday occurrence at school for us, and that was probably from like grade 3 to like grade 6. It was like a regular occurrence at school for us.
Yeah, like I don't remember like anyone ever playing it at school. Like I know like the kids around the neighborhood, usually the older kids would talk to the younger kids about it and kind of just like try to scare them. But I don't know why, but I feel like me growing up in Orangeville, not really many people talked about it.
Hmm.
I was terrified I would never do it, but like apparently my mom did it when she was a teenager and nothing ever happened there either. And but
Yeah, like nothing ever came out of it that I'm aware of, but again, like I didn't stick around to find out.
that's fair.
So,
So there are many variations of the way that you would summon her, or the, what she's supposed to look like. But the main conceptions is, you know, you're in a dark bathroom with candlelight. You spin and chant her name multiple times, and then her appearance is that she's a pale woman with long dark hair. That's kind of the common just similarities that almost every story has. But what changes is the numbers of spins and chants. Usually it's 3. In most stories, people remember it being 3. But some have said that it was 7, and some has said even up to 13. So it depends on what you grew up around and what backstory you believed or that area believed was the case. So sometimes, usually, what I know is the most common is just saying the name Bloody Mary 3 times, or X amount of times. But apparently, some of the summoning chants were also "I believe in Bloody Mary," and some of them, because like in some of the variations, the Bloody Mary figure is supposed to be holding a dead baby, which I'll get into that, but you're supposed to like chant somewhere along the line. Like I couldn't find the exact chant, but apparently they would say something along the lines of like Bloody Mary, I have your baby. Um
interesting. I've
and
never heard of that
yeah, and
before,
then
but
they would summon your they when it blood and blood. Oh my god. When Bloody Mary was summoned, she would still be pale. Her eyes would still be like really darkened, and she'd have long dark hair, but she'd be holding a baby. It's I'll get into why that would be. Like it depends on like that is a very specific backstory that you would have to believe in for that to have occurred. Nobody knows if it's based on a true story or if it's just a, you know, misinterpretation of that old ritual I talked about in the beginning. But there are like if it is based on a true story, there are a few real life scenarios that people believe that could be the real person behind Bloody Mary. So the first one is Mary the First. So she was also known as Mary Tudor, and she was born on February 18th, 1516. She's an Aquarius. So she was the one of the daughters of King Henry VIII, which I don't know if you know very much about King Henry VIII.
I do not.
He was not a great person. I he
I feel like that's
is
like the theme of this podcast. I'm just saying.
yeah, well yeah. But he's not the villain. He's not like the biggest villain in this story. But he continuously married a woman, had sex with as many women as he possibly could, because he was obsessed with trying to have a son, because he wanted to have an heir to take the throne.
Okay, you know what's funny? So that just reminds me of when we were younger, and we have a cousin, um, shout out to Brittany, who would play Sims and always wanted either a girl or a boy on her Sims, and she would do that exact thing just to get it. Just reminds me of like that story.
Well,
And
I'm
she would just keep putting them up for adoption until she got what she wanted on the game. Obviously, it's a game, so you can do that, but it just kind of reminded me of that moment for some reason, and I got a
well,
good chuckle.
I hope she doesn't do the second half of his ritual here, because after he would try to have a son with a woman, if she eventually could no longer conceive and he was not given a son, he would behead them. Um,
No, yeah, Brittany, please do not do it.
because they couldn't give him a son, even though it's funny because he's the one passing down that gene, right? So, like in this YouTuber's song, about how horrible the education system is, he says like, but I don't know anything about modern events, but I know everything about how King Henry VIII you know got married, divorced, beheaded them, and like it's just stupid. But anyway, so he ended up having a son, but he when it was time for him to take over the throne, he got extremely sick, so he wasn't able to do it. So Mary, which was his oldest daughter, was the person to take over the throne. So she was the first queen of England to become queen while she was single. So she wasn't married to anybody when she took the throne. She was crowned the queen in July of 1553, and then 3 years later she married King Philip, who was the king of Spain, and they married until she died in 1558. And so her father and her half brother, which is the one that was sick, he's Edward VI, they were her predecessors, so they were on the throne before she was. And the main thing that they did when they were in office was that they pushed the English Reformation. So it was to separate the church away from the authority of the Pope and the Catholic Church, to allow the expansion of different religious groups of different sectors of Christianity and such, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Mary didn't agree with the Reformation, so King Henry tried to do everything he could to do his back way of trying to make sure that she wouldn't be able to take over the throne, which obviously didn't work because she was crowned in July 1553. She didn't agree with the Reformation, so when she was crowned, she attempted to reverse it, and that was the biggest thing she did, in the 5 short years that she was queen. So to do this, she thought that she had to get rid of everyone who didn't follow the way that the church was. So if they weren't following the proper Christianity, she would kill them for it. So she had killed over 280 Protestants by burning them at the stake. And then this is why many of her subjects nicknamed her Bloody Mary.
Sorry, like you cannot see my face, but I'm just like sitting with my mouth wide open over here, like what in the actual?
Yeah, so it was crazy. But we all know how children learn from their parents, and so what ended up occurring was Mary was also obsessed with having a child, but not to the point where she would behead her partners for it. But in September of 1554, Mary had stopped menstruating. She gained weight. She felt nauseous in the mornings and stuff like that. So a lot of her subjects and her doctors and they all believed that she was pregnant. But then later that year, her husband expressed to Mary's brother that he didn't believe that she was pregnant. I don't know what gave him the idea that maybe she wasn't. Maybe it didn't, line up with their sex schedule. Who knows? But eventually, come her due date, and she doesn't give birth to a child. And then The doctors waited an extra month or two, but there was still no baby. So
It's like a long time to wait in, like you'd think they'd wait like a few weeks maybe, but like
yeah,
wait months is kind of like a little excessive.
it is also the 1500s.
I was
So
gonna say like it is kind of also like a long time ago, but like
yeah,
eh,
and so obviously it came out that she actually was never really pregnant. But it's not that she didn't
clearly.
yeah, well, she didn't know it at the time. She actually had this thing called pseudodiastasis, which is when a woman feels an intense desire to get pregnant. Their body may produce some pregnancy signals, such as having a swollen belly, enlarged breasts, a sensation of fetal movement, which the brain then misinterprets these signals as having a pregnancy, and then it triggers a release of hormones, which actually leads to the rest of the pregnancy symptoms. So she wanted to have a baby so bad that her body started preparing her to carry the child, and so like it was a lot of mental stuff that was going on. But come her due date, and obviously it's very obvious that she's not pregnant. Her stomach actually started to shrink back down to normal. So like it was like once she realized that she's actually not pregnant, like her body, like her brain realized it, and it stopped producing the hormones to hold the pregnancy. So pseudocyesis is just the brain misfiring due to misinterpretations. But you could also have a false pregnancy, obviously, by having delusions through disorders such as schizophrenia. For those who don't know, schizophrenia is a chronic brain disorder that affects less than 1% of the population. The symptoms typically include delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, trouble with cognition, and a lack of motivation. And having a false pregnancy, believe it or not, also happens in men. Men usually
How is that possible?
men usually experience couvade, or sympathetic pregnancy. So while their partner is pregnant, they sometimes will develop many of the same symptoms of their pregnant partners. So usually, sometimes they'll gain weight, they become nauseous, and they have a lot of headaches, backaches, stuff like that. So it's just like feeling the emotions of your partner and kind of just like taking them on yourself. That's what happens in men sometimes. So
Interesting.
yeah, and obviously they're not pregnant because I mean they don't have a uterus. So it's just your brain is interpreting something and assuming that you have it in yourself. Which is funny because in my last week of school, right before I finished my exams, I learned about mirror neurons. So when you watch somebody eating an apple, your brain fires in the same way as it would if you were the person eating the apple. So like this doesn't exactly surprise me. So like if you see somebody in pain, you're probably going to feel
Yeah.
pain, right? Like to an extent. But yeah. So that is the first story, and this is what I was talking about with the Bloody Mary that sometimes appears with a dead child. That would be this one, and it's very specific to only this story. It doesn't include any of the other ones really. Well,
Okay.
well, maybe another one. I'll do like I was gonna do a different one in between that, but I'll do that one next because there's another one that possibly, but it wouldn't be her baby. So them saying like, "Oh, Bloody Mary, I have your child," wouldn't make sense. But
Yeah.
so this girl isn't. Her name's not even Mary, but a lot of people say that it could be her that's associated with Bloody Mary because there's so many linkages between them. So this other one is about Elizabeth Bathory, who is also known as the Blood Countess. She was born August 7th, 1560, so also the 1500s. She's a Leo. She was a Hungarian noblewoman. Her family had a lot of money. She lived in a castle, and she was allegedly a serial killer. She never, like, there was never any evidence to prove if she was or was not a killer, but a lot of people went to her castle and disappeared. So, you know, take those assumptions as you may. But if she did, in fact, kill those people, it is said that Bathory and 4 of her servants were torturing and killing hundreds of girls and women between the years of 1590 and 1610. So girls and women were last known to have been going to her castle before they disappeared. Her servants were eventually put on trial and they were convicted, but she was never charged with anything. She was just confined to her home, and because she is someone with a ton of money, they could do whatever they want, right? She had the pull, and rumor had it that even the king at the time owed her money. So, like, obviously, if the king owes you money, you can boss him around to do whatever you want. But the linkages between her legend and Bloody Mary is then one of the main associations is the inclusion of blood. So a lot of her legends describe her vampiric tendencies. So they said that after she killed all these women and girls, she bathed in their blood to retain her youth. And these stories eventually came out after her death. So, like, you can't say that they're not reliable, but you can't say that they are. Because it came out, like, after she died. So, like, of course, like, now she can't say if she did or not, but, and she also died, so if she was actually bathing to try to, bathing in their blood to try to retain her youth, they didn't work. So,
yeah, clearly not.
But there are something also that's, whether it's true or not, nobody knows, is that sometimes people say that she's the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula, but there isn't any evidence to accompany the claim, so, like, who knows? But most of her, they think that she's the inspiration because Bram Stoker, like, he lived in a castle and would, like, collect the souls of people, right? Because, like, you need their blood to stay young and to stay alive. But so most of her legends nickname her as either the Blood Countess or the Dracula Countess. But that's kind of just her story. So there's two other ones that I'm mostly going to talk about. So the next one, I would say, like, probably isn't associated with Bloody Mary, but there's some weird things that happen in it. Her name is Mary Worth, which a lot of people know of Mary Worth or Mary Worthington. I don't know if it was eventually shortened, but their stories kind of coincide. But she's either a woman who killed slaves escaping the American South via the Underground Railroad, or she was a woman who was burned at the stake during the witch trials because they believed that she was a witch. But I said that the townspeople mainly believed that she was a witch simply because she lived in an extremely small cabin in the middle of the forest, and she sold tinctures and herbal remedies. And I had to look up tinctures because I've never heard of that before, but it's just an herbal extract.
Okay.
So just a whole bunch of, like, herbal remedies, and so people avoided interacting with her, worried that she would curse them or their animals or their crops, and sometimes even those who decided to use her remedies, they were shunned for partaking in Wicca. So, like, if you're at your last resort for trying to, like, save somebody who's sick and you try to use it, then you're shunned from the rest of your community. Crazy to me, but I mean, it's the 1500s. So then eventually small girls started going missing in the area that she was living in, and so naturally, with no explanation, they assumed it was Mary. So people went out to Mary's cabin, and of course Mary denied all knowledge of the girls' location and what could have happened to them, but apparently she always appeared elderly and haggard, like, so, like, very rough. But then apparently that drastically changed and she started to look more feminine and youthful. So people assumed that she was kind of doing the same thing as Elizabeth, where she was probably either drinking their blood, whatever, to retain her youth. Kind of like a Mother Gothel situation from Tangled. So that one, like, I can see why they would say maybe she's Bloody Mary, but there's no situation where, like, why would she kill people through a mirror? So... And so this is the last story, which, it's a crazy story, but, like, I could see it probably being the most likely out of all of them to be the actual Bloody Mary. This one happened in the 1800s. There was a girl named Mary. They lived in a town which was not specified in anything that I read, and then an illness had washed over the entire town, making people drop dead like flies. And I looked in the time of the, the 1800s, and out of all those on the list, it was probably smallpox, because it killed a lot of people very quickly. So that's what I would presume. But when the doctors could no longer feel a pulse and they couldn't feel or see anyone breathing, they presumed them dead. But this is the time where you couldn't tell if anyone was actually dead or not. So then you would bury them, and you would have the hole in the coffin with the string that led up to the surface with a bell. And people would ring it if they were actually, like, if they woke up later and they were alive. So they would have, so when people say, oh, I'm working the graveyard shift, it was like that originally came from people actually like being paid to stand in graveyards at night ready with a shovel. So like if a bell ever rang, they would dig them up in the middle of the night. Yeah, so that's where graveyard shift actually came from. It was people were literally paid to sit around in graveyards waiting for a bell to ring.
My God.
Yeah, so anyway, this is what they did. She was buried like in her yard, but her parents didn't want to bury her like completely, so they put her in the coffin and then just put her into the ground, but they didn't cover it with dirt because they were hoping that like in a couple days, she would wake up and like she can, like, it'd be easier to get her out. But for a couple days, nothing happened. The townspeople and and the family's friends just tried to like tell them, okay, like it's been a couple days, she's probably not coming back. So then eventually her parents, they couldn't finish the burial, but they went with their friends somewhere for a weekend or a couple days, and their neighbor buried the rest of Mary into the ground, and he filled her up with dirt and everything like that, made sure that the bell was working the way it was supposed to. But nobody was home. She eventually woke up and she started ringing the bell, but no one could hear it because the neighbor was so far away. And so a couple days later, her parents came back and they saw that the bell was not at the grave. It was like multiple feet away. So then, hurriedly, they dug up the grave and opened up the coffin. And in the coffin, they saw their daughter frozen in a terrifying state, and she was completely covered in blood. And that was because she was scratching at the top of the coffin, trying to claw her way out. And she obviously did not manage to get out. But that's where people think like she's probably Bloody Mary because she's covered in blood. Her name was Mary. She tried to scratch her way out of the coffin. So this makes sense with her trying to scratch people's eyes out. So if the mirror thing, I don't know, but so when you would say Bloody Mary in the mirror and she would come through the mirror and she would claw your eyes out, like it was just like almost like a defense mechanism of her trying to claw her way out, like to live. So like that is what I would say is probably the most likely backstory of who Bloody Mary probably was. So there's also a couple psych explanations that could be the reason why people see Bloody Mary, and I just want to talk about it because you don't know if it's actually a ghost or not. It could just be a myth that came from a misinterpretation. So this doctor of psychology from the University of Urbino in Urbino, Italy, his name is Giovanni Caputo, and he developed this theory on strange face illusion. So his theory was that when in light restricting environments, such as being in a bathroom only with candlelight, if people were to either look at their face in a mirror or look at someone else's face for an extended period of time, the image that they're perceiving will eventually change. This will typically occur because your brain recognizes that you're looking at something, but if it's not being stimulated and you just kind of like it's like watching paint dry, and you just like kind of staring, your brain will eventually get bored, gets distracted, and then so it takes all the outside cues of things and it will morph the image that you're looking at. And he actually did a study with at least 50 people where he would have them looking in a mirror for extended periods of time, and they would say that their features change, but then they also had it where they were looking at somebody else for a long period of time and they said that like their basic structure was there, but they had different features from other people. So it was almost like you're looking at somebody for a long period of time and you're taking images of different people's features that you know and like putting them onto somebody else's face. So
Yeah.
it could be a psych thing where when people see like their eyes are bloody or whatever, right, they could be they're thinking of Bloody Mary because they just said Bloody Mary, uh and if they're looking at themselves long enough, they're morphing into seeing the image of them with bloody eyes.
Yeah.
So like that's one of them. But it could also be uh a thing about dissociative identity where it affects a person's ability to connect with reality. This is a Dissociative identity disorder is a very, very rare disorder. It occurs in less than 1%, and they said that it's like probably closer to 0.1% than it is 1% of the population. It's most commonly found in women compared to men. Dissociative identity can lead to gaps in memory, and it can cause hallucinations. So you believe that something's real when it isn't. It's kind of a because it goes along the lines of schizophrenia. You're not seeing things correctly, and many of those with dissociative identity have gone through a traumatic experience. So anyone that's seen it and they've gone through like abuse or something like that, like or they've experienced someone dying or something like that, that could affect like the course of their life and result in them seeing what they do. There's also a thing called Troxler's fading, which was first identified by Swiss physician Ignaz Troxler in 1804. It's kind of the similar as Giovanni's theory of the illusion, because he said that when one fixates on a particular point for any length of time, long or short, an unchanging stimulus away from the fixation point will fade away and disappear. So eventually, like he was one of the ones that kind of led the charge in you seeing something could just be your brain and not your eyes. So like that kind of just blends in with the other ones of it could be a brain thing.
Yeah.
Um then there's also this thing called apophenia, which was coined by Klaus Conrad, which is a German neurologist and psychopathologist. He said that the ability to see things that aren't there could it can also just be you perceiving a connection or a meaningful pattern between two things that are completely unrelated, and you just like reading into something that
It's
like
not
more into
there.
something that's not true. So like example is like you're doing Bloody Mary, and so all you're thinking about is Bloody Mary. So if something happens where like the ceiling light was loose and it fell, and it's like, oh my god, it's Bloody Mary. Like
Mhm.
it's that very jump to conclusion thing, and like it's like no, like this was loose. It's been loose for 17 months, like, and it falls every 3 days. Like it can easily be that where like I had this with my old manager at work. He went up to the third floor and he was going in between floors to do his rounds, and yeah, he smelled like maple. And so he comes back down. He's like, "Oh my god! Like it smells weird on that floor, and it's not on any other floor. It doesn't make any sense." And he's like, "I'm just like it's so weird." And I was like, "Dude, the third floor is the floor with the spa. And he's like immediately associating it with there being a ghost or something. And I'm like, "Oh my god!"
Interesting.
I'm like, "Oh my god, dude! Like relax." Um, but and then some people also say that it could be self hypnosis when it comes to Bloody Mary. Just believing something so much that you're almost like manifesting it to occur. So it's like almost like
Yeah.
negative self hypnosis. So you're like psyching yourself out to have it happen. Bloody Mary is obviously extremely played out in pop culture. Supernatural and Ghost Whisperer are the ones that really came to my mind because I watched both of those shows. So in Supernatural, Bloody Mary is Mary Worthington, and in this one, Bloody Mary dies in front of a mirror. She was killed by somebody, and she wrote onto the mirror in front of her the letters TRE. And then the authorities suspected it was a man named Trevor Sampson, who was a surgeon in the area, but he was never apprehended. And then, of course, since she died in front of the mirror, her spirit lingered in and lived in the mirror that she died in front of. And so she followed the mirror everywhere, haunting it. And then, so when people would play the Bloody Mary game, she would attach herself to that mirror that they did it in, and if somebody in that household or anything like that, or anyone who steps in front of that mirror, then from that point on, and they had a secret of an unsolved or missolved death, she would kill them by like almost like liquefying their eyes and like having them bleed out of their eyes.
Jesus.
Yeah, and then they actually found out that eventually, like, um, on the back of the mirror, and like you could only see it in like ultraviolet light, was she would write in like almost like if someone was like playing with blood, right? And writing somebody's name, she would have the name of the person that was like had an unsolved or missolved death on the back of it. So that's how they knew that, this kind she was like attacking people who were not innocent. But so it's almost like cut and dry of a couple different stories with a little bit of a pop culture twist of having her be murdered. But and then also Ghost Whisperer also had it, but the main one that it kind of followed was the legend of the Japanese legend called Hanako-san, which is related to which directly translates to Hanako of the toilet. So this is kind of almost like what you said when you were growing up, when you guys had always played it in the washroom. So there's a couple different backstories. She was either a ghost of World War II World War II era, where she was playing hide and seek, and then an air raid happened. She died, or she died by suicide in the third stall of a school toilet after intense bullying. But some also have speculated she was murdered, or like they accidentally killed her through like bullying or something. Maybe they, like try to give her a swirly or whatever, and they killed her, whatever. But she was commonly described as having a short bobbed haircut and wore a red skirt or dress, but everything else about her appearance changes from story to story. So typically what would happen was they would go into a girl's washroom. They say it's usually when she shows up, it's usually on a third floor washroom. Then you go to the third stall and ask if Hanako-san is present. If she's there, she will reply with a variation of, "Yes, I am." And then the individual can then make the decision if they're going to open the stall door to greet Hanako-san, or if they're going to just walk away. So they have multiple chances to like back out of this ritual. But when they open the door, there's 3 different variations of what could happen. So either Hanako-san may pull the individual into the toilet, which may lead to their death. Or if it is the story of her being bullied and she died by suicide, she may protect an individual from bullies if they were somebody who was commonly bullied, so they don't end up like her by dying by suicide. So that's kind of like 2 sides of the same coin, to the other one, where if you were a bully or something, she'd probably pull you into the toilet and kill you. But the third one, which is a lot more demonic, they said that sometimes like a 3-headed lizard demon would mimic a little girl's voice to be Hanako-san, and then they would kill the individual for invading Hanako-san's privacy. So like that's just kind of what Hanako-san is. And then lastly, Lady Gaga has a song called Bloody Mary, but it doesn't really talk much about Bloody Mary. It only really talks about it in the first verse, and she writes about, like, she says that, oh, if somebody asks about my religion, it's you. So it's almost like a blind follower, because I obviously don't want to die, right? So you're gonna say like, oh yeah, like I'm definitely Catholic, even if you're not.
Yeah.
And then she also writes about the king dying, and that she won't cry when someone's gone, or if she has to crucifix them. So it's almost just like a relation to Bloody Mary, the first of like Queen of Scots. That's the story of Bloody Mary. A lot of different variations of the same urban myth and legend. All the main premise is usually they die in front of a mirror. Usually they die in a bloody way, or they committed acts that are extremely bloody, and then they would kill people through their spirits. But
That is wild.
yeah, I was like doing it last night at work, and I was like, oh my god, like I just want to keep doing it, but like it was 8 pages long. I'm like, can't need to stop. Like I can't keep going.
Yeah, I could have easily like got longer on the one that I'm gonna cover today, but I was just like, okay, at some point I just have to stop.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I finally, oh my god, trying to get the podcast on Apple Podcasts was the most difficult task of my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like you have to go through
Mm,
like 17 different steps to get there. It was horrible.
I have so many tabs open because I've been working on something else as well. I don't know why that's not splitting properly.
Yeah, and
It's supposed to be.
you've been sending memes. Oh my god, that is so
It is. It's not a meme. It's freaking
cute. A
adorable.
picture,
I
yeah.
want that at my wedding.
Yeah, you
Whenever
finally
that.
you shared it. I'm glad.
All right. So I think I'm ready to get started. Are you ready for this?
Absolutely. I don't even remember what case you're covering, so I did.
Okay, cool. So today I'm gonna cover the BTK Killer or the BTK Strangler.
Right. I'm so excited.
So this is one like that I've been like honestly super fascinated about for the last little while. And then when we talked about doing a podcast, I was like, yo, like there's some pretty recent developments in this case. So I was like, I definitely want to cover it like pretty early and kind of stay up to date on kind of everything. So um yeah. So I'm just gonna kind of do it in like a timeline manner because it is like the
Extensive.
crimes span over like from like the 70s to like the early 90s, and
Wow,
then
20
it
years.
even kind of takes a bit of a hiatus and then kind of resumes in 2004 and 2005 respectively. So it is kind of pretty vast horizon for this for BTK.
I had no idea he
So
was still like operating in 2004. That's crazy already.
yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So his timeline starts January 15th of 1974 when there was a murder of the Otero family. Um, so I'm just going to refer to him as BTK because obviously there's really no developments into the case until much later. So we'll kind of, as we kind of find out details, like I'm just going to refer to him as BTK. So January 15th of 1974, BTK murdered the Otero family. He severed the phone line so that his victims could not call for help. He entered the East Wichita home of Joseph and Julie Otero. The homeowners were both strangled, and two of their young children were killed. Their bodies were left to be discovered by the three oldest siblings once they returned from school later that day. Both Julie and Joseph Otero worked at the Coleman factory that makes camping equipment, which we'll kind of talk about the Coleman Company a little bit more once we kind of find out a little bit more information. So Joseph Otero was suffocated with a plastic bag over his head, and he was strangled with clothesline. Julie was strangled with rope twice. Joseph Otero II, so their 9-year-old son, was suffocated with a plastic bag. And Josephine Otero, 11, with their daughter, was hanged with a rope, and her body was masturbated on.
Gross.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of like a common theme with like some of his killings. Like he doesn't do it to all of his victims, but it is fairly common. He then struck again in on April 4th of 1974. His victim this time being a Catherine Bright. She was also a Coleman employee. She had returned home with her brother Kevin to find an individual waiting with a gun. Kevin managed to survive being shot in the head twice, but he was unable to save his sister. And she is, from what I can tell, the only one of the victim who was not strangled to death. She was stabbed to death because she put up too much of a fight when she struggled too much when he was trying to strangle her, that he ended up having to stab her instead. And then we go to October of 1974 when a young man came forward to police alleging to want to confess to the killings of the Otero family with two friends. An editor at the Wichita Eagle received a strange phone call that directed him to a mechanical engineering book at the Wichita Public Library. Police then went to the library and found a book. Um, which had a letter wedged inside of it. And the letter wrote, "Those three dudes you have in custody are just talking to get publicity. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You see, he at it again. They will be on the next victim." So, along with including them, he also included unknown details of the Otero killings that nobody else knew but the killer and the police. The letter is filled with what authorities recognize kind of as peculiar misspellings and grammar errors. Also had like a distinctive sexual suggestive signature to his letter. So they kind of figured that he was possibly someone who wasn't educated or was trying to throw them off by kind of perceiving to not be educated, even though he was super educated, like kind of throw them off the path a little bit.
I mean, yeah, that'd be a good start. Like not that I ever would, but if I was ever to start killing, I'd probably do the exact same.
Yeah,
But it makes a lot of sense. It just shows like how like intelligent he was to realize to do that.
yeah. So, and then we don't have another victim until March 17th of 1977. So a few years later, there was a mother of three by the name of Shirley Vian Relford. She was 24. He entered her home after a 5-year-old child opened the door to him. He then barricaded the child and his two siblings in the bathroom before strangling Shirley Vian Relford. The kids eventually escaped, and provided a vague description of the intruder, but nothing that was enough to that anybody would recognize who the intruder was. So he was lying in wait, kind of stalking her, and then I guess he knocked on the door, and one of her kids opened the door to him and pretty much allowed him in the home. December 8th of 1977, he bound and strangled 25-year-old Nancy Fox. This is the first time BTK, or the second time I should say, that BTK communicated with police, pointing them to his handiwork. He went and found a payphone and called the police and said, "You will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing Street." He just kind of abruptly told the dispatcher that answered the phone. January 31st, Nancy Fox was tied up and strangled repeatedly with a belt, and her body was also masturbated on. January 31st, 1978, the Wichita Eagle, which I believe is their local radio station, newspaper firm, received an index card with a poem that begins with Shirley Locks, wilt thou be mine? Unaware of the connection to Shirley by Anne Relford, and believing it to be a Valentine's Day note, the mail clerk forwarded the index card to the paper's classified department to be published in the paper.
Oh my god.
So they just thought, like, they didn't realize that it had to do with the murder. They just thought it was somebody who wanted to, get somebody's attention for Valentine's Day, and they ended up kind of like publishing it, sending it to the department to be published.
Yeah.
But obviously no mention of there being a connection to the killings.
How'd they
So
find
this is
out that it was him then? Did he eventually take credit for that?
so we'll kind of get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So in February 10th of 1978, so just 2 weeks later, BTK was angered by the lack of response from his last attempt, so he opted to send a more direct message to Wichita-based Cake TV, and he stated, "How many people do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or some national attention?" he writes, before providing a list of suggested nicknames. So he gave them nicknames that they could refer to him as. And three of the nicknames that he gave them was the BTK Strangler, the Wichita Hangman, or the Asphyxiator. Wichita Police Chief Richard Lemunian subsequently called a news conference to reveal the presence of the BTK Strangler in the area. He said, "We believe the perpetrator has the capability to kill again." So that was the first kind of instance of where the police were like, okay, there's somebody out there. This is all connected. We don't know who they are. They're not really leaving us much to go on. But, we're 4 years in, and this guy is mad because he's not getting the attention that he believes he should get, and he's not getting that public outcry.
Yeah,
So,
poor boy. Oh,
right, right.
didn't get the
So,
attention he wanted. Oh,
yeah. So then we fast forward to a little bit over a year later. On April 28th of 1979, BTK was waiting for a 63-year-old Anna Williams to return home from work, but so he would stalk them to get kind of like find their pattern of when they, go to work, who they live with, when they come home. So he kind of knew their routines, so he could, plan his attacks around their schedule. So he was lying in wait of 63-year-old Anna Williams to return home from work, but she took too long and didn't come home when he expected her to come home. So he gave up and left. So less than 2 months later, she learned of her brush with death when she received several of her personal items by mail, along with poems titled, "Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear?" So he stole personal effects from her home while he was in her home waiting for her to return home from work, which she never did in a timely manner. So he got frustrated and left, and then would start mailing her items to her home with poems, indicating that she would have come home, like she wouldn't, be here today kind of thing, which is
so
kind of
twisted.
fucked up.
Yeah, that's so twisted.
Yeah. So then August 14th of 1979, authorities reached out to the public and released a recording of the 1977 phone call that was in which he reported the death of Nancy Fox. Tips began to pour in, but like people thought they recognized the voice, although no relevant information came from the tips. In 1984, so 5 years later, there had been no developments, no activity on the case. The Ghostbusters are formed, so Chief Lamunian established a task force devoted strictly to the BTK crimes. He nicknamed the task force the Ghostbusters after the popular movie. The task force included a young officer named Ken Landwehr, who will spearhead later efforts to track down the killer. So we'll talk about him like later on in the case. April 27th, 1985, after playing an evening of after going for dinner and bingo with her boyfriend, Maureen Hedge is taken from her home in the Wichita suburb of Park City, just down the road from the perpetrator's house. So someone that she was fairly familiar with because they lived in close proximity to each other. She was located 8 days later, dead of strangulation. However, police failed to connect her murder to BTK. So they thought that was just a kind of off murder and that
Yeah,
they
separate event. Yeah.
didn't. Yeah. So then September 16th, 1986, Bill Wegerly returns home for lunch to find his 2-year-old sitting by himself and his wife Vicky dead in their bedroom. In the absence of other credible evidence, the husband became the prime suspect in her death. So again, not a death that they were able to connect back to BTK. So pretty like smart guy to obviously leave no traces to kind of connect his murders.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it kind of reminds me of Easter Golden State Killer, right? Because when he did different types of crimes, he didn't do anything that was similar in his MO to make anyone
yeah,
think that they were related.
yeah, which is weird because this one, his MO is very similar, obviously, but just the fact that they weren't able to connect all the cases together is kind of crazy considering his MO was the same. Um, they were all killed by strangulation aside from one, but yeah. So then January 19th of 1991, BTK threw a cinder block through a sliding door at the home of retiree Dolores Davis. He then strangled her to death and left her body by a bridge. Because he became preoccupied by his day-to-day duties, BTK drops off the map. So he obviously will get into like who BTK is a little bit later on and kind of what he did and what kind of took him away from the killings. So fast forward to January 2004, still no activity in the case. It's kind of gone cold for the most part. There's been no new developments. So the Wichita Eagle ran a 30th anniversary piece on BTK. They printed an article recalling the terror BTK wielded in the 1970s and suggesting that they had faded from memory after many years. BTK later admitted that this article spurred him to revive his deadly alter ego. So for a long time, they thought that he died or was already in prison for unrelated crimes because he had dropped off the map, and possibly that he was, an older gentleman at the time of his crimes or and stuff.
Yeah, maybe he
So
just
yeah,
died or something. Yeah.
yeah. So then in March 19th of 2004, BTK announced his return. The Wichita Eagle received an envelope from a Bill Thomas Hillman containing a copy of Vicky Wegerle's missing driver's license, photos of her body, and BTK's distinctive signature, a chilling message that links her unsolved murder to BTK and declares the Wichita Terror to be alive. So sorry, this is all happening in Kansas, in the United States.
Yeah. I gathered from Wichita, but
Yeah,
for other people who don't know, it's definitely in Kansas.
yeah. So then May 5th of 2004, BTK teases the police with a puzzle. He mailed Cake TV, included a phony ID, chapter titles for a BTK biography, and a find the word letter grid spelling out clues like prowl and fantasies. Though investigators note the lack of his usual signature, puzzlers later realized the letters RADER are grouped together around the numbers 6220, the author's street address.
Oh my
But at that
god.
time, they still weren't able to kind of connect what the significance of those letters are or of those numbers and why they're grouped together so frequently in the puzzle. December 13th of 2005, so a little over a year later, BTK leaves another disturbing package. BTK leaves more messaging in various public locations. A man walking through Wichita's Murdoch Park stumbles on a garbage bag containing Nancy Fox's driver's license, a Barbie doll with a hood over its head, and arms tied behind its back. January 25th of 2005, acting on instructions from a postcard that was mailed to Cake TV, police find a cereal box outside of Wichita containing graphic description of BTK's first murders and another doll in a death position. A different section of the postcard asks about whether they found his package at Home Depot. After checking the store, investigators learned that an employee had found a cereal box in the bed of his truck. A search of his trash produced the box and a message asking if BTK was allowed to communicate, if he could communicate with police via a floppy disk without being traced. If so, the police were instructed to run a newspaper ad with the message, Rex, it will be okay.
Wow.
So fast forward to January 28th, so just a few days later, police signal BTK through the newspaper. After an undercover detective makes arrangements with the Wichita Eagle, the paper runs an ad that reads, Rex, it'll be okay. Contact me, P.O. Box, first four reference numbers at 67202. 6 days later, BTK confirms his receipt of the message through another postcard sent to Cake. February 16th, 2005, a computer floppy disk arrived by mail. It was passed along to cybercop Randy Stone, who uncovers BTK's message about checking an index card for more information. Along with, he searched the metadata on the floppy disk, and it revealed that it had been used by a Dennis at Christ Lutheran Church and at the Park City Library. Within seconds of an internet search for Christ Lutheran Church reveals the name of its president, Dennis Rader,
Oh my god.
Rader.
So you're telling me that this man wrote his taunting things to the police in a library? In a public library?
As well as his church that he was a part of.
Oh
Yes.
my god. Imagine just imagine you're sitting in a library, you just want to check out a book real quick. Because like when I was younger, and like, you know, your phones didn't actually have ability to use the internet, me and my friends would used to go to the library, like the public library, to just use the computers there. And just imagine you're like looking over and this person's like writing this random letter, and it's like, oh, you will never find out what I did. You'll only know me by if I, you know, buy and torture and kill them. And you're like, oh my freaking god, like what the hell is that?
Yeah. So it gets better. So yeah, so it revealed the name of the president, Dennis Rader, and if we go back to May 5th, 2004, the puzzlers realized the letters Rader, so his last name, Rader, were grouped together with the number 6220, which was the author of the letter's street address. So now that the metadata was accessed by a gentleman by the name of Dennis, and after searching both things together, finding out that their president's name was Dennis Rader, so they were already armed with DNA evidence that they had carefully preserved by the Ghostbusters Lieutenant Landwehr. So he was the young detective who was initially assigned to lead that task force back in the early days of this case. So him and his team had learned that Rader's daughter, Carrie, had been in the hospital for a pap smear. The hospital soon turned over a sample of her DNA, which matched that of BTK. So they were able to identify him based on his daughter's pap smear,
Oh my
and were able to
god.
link him to the crimes via his daughter's pap smear, which is crazy. So February 25th of 2005, he was on his way home from his office to have lunch with his wife. He was pulled over by a line of police cars and was taken into custody. One of the first things that he had mentioned to police was, "Can you guys tell my wife that I won't be home for lunch?" So like no really care in the world, just let her know that I won't be home for lunch today.
What is up with
Like
serial killers that do that? Like remember like with the Golden State Killer, when he was arrested, he was like, "Oh yeah, there's a roast in the oven. Just be careful of that." Like what?
yeah. So he totally thought like, you know, they didn't have anything and that he was just going to be going home later and it was basically going to be a big misunderstanding kind of thing. But he confessed after being confronted with DNA evidence and enjoys what he believes to be a bonding session with the law enforcement agents, although he is irritated that Landwehr lied to him about the security of communications with the floppy disk.
Oh, something didn't
Um,
go his way. Oh no.
I know, right?
Oh my god, a
So
police officer lying to get true evidence? Oh no.
and the thing is, it wasn't even really Landwehr. Like, yeah, Landwehr said that, oh, like it would be, not traceable kind of thing, but it was their cyber detective that was able to, you know, they were like, we guaranteed he doesn't know that you can see who accessed, the floppy disk and how it saves it in the system. Anyways, so his arrest was later announced at Wichita City Hall the following day, and it drew an applause from the audience gathered. In April 19th of 2005, Rader waived his right to a preliminary hearing, and he acknowledged from the defense that the state possessed enough evidence to send the case to trial. 2 weeks later, Rader remained silent and had the judge enter a not guilty plea for him. So he confessed to them, but then in trial was like, yep, not guilty, I didn't do them. So June 27th of 2005, Rader pleaded guilty to the BTK killings, catching the prosecutors off guard by pleading guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. Rader provides the court with explicit details on how he chose, stalked, and killed each of his victims. So that he was going to plead insanity, but there was just not enough for them to stand and be like, yeah, he's insane. He is insane, but he is of sound mind and body.
I mean, he was obsessed with attention though. So like the fact like there's
Well, so,
no
and that's the thing, like, if he wouldn't have, you know, when they released the 30th anniversary copy of that thing, if he wouldn't have then initiated contact with the police, like, he possibly could still be a free man today and not get caught. You know what I mean? Like, it is
yeah.
potential, possible that he committed something else and, then they found his DNA. Like, there are very things, like, things could have been so different, but he also could still be a free man today if he
If he just
hadn't been
kept his
too
trap
inflated
shut.
by his ego to
Yeah.
get the attention. Um, so August 18th of 2005, Rader is sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison. The 2-day sentencing hearing featured testimony from the investigators who described documentation of his torture-fueled sexual fantasies, emotional pleas from the victims' families, and an apology from the convicted killer, who expressed hope that the families will one day forgive him. Having committed the murders before Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994, the BTK killer received a sentence of 10 consecutive life terms in prison for a minimum of 175 years without the possibility of parole. He pretty much will die in prison. January 29th of 2019, Rader's daughter, Carrie, wrote a book about him, and she published her book called A Serial Killer's Daughter, My Story of Hope, Love, and Overcoming. The memoir describes her relationship with Rader growing up and how she overcame the horror of discovering his crimes. February 22nd of 2019, Rader speaks out in an interview for the first time since his conviction in 2005. He wrote a letter to DailyMail.com boasting about how he is treated like a pet inside the high-security El Dorado Correctional Facility. He claims he was possessed by demons named Batter and Factor X when he committed his crimes. He
Okay.
had he had come close to executing an 11th victim, but did not follow through with killing that 11th victim. He also speaks
Sorry.
very highly of his daughter Carrie after she published a book about him, which he basically like tried to get somebody to kind of write his memoir, and his daughter did that, so he like is very very proud of her and speaks very highly of her for doing that.
I'm just like the whole demon thing, like the likelihood. Okay, let's just say he was possessed by a demon. All right. So the likelihood that after 30 years of going dormant, that this demon would randomly circle back to Mr. Dennis to boast about something. I like there's no way, right? Like come on.
Well, and like he kind of also kind of shot himself in the foot in the sense that he mentioned that like he came out of like his hiatus of crimes because like he just felt that he wasn't getting like enough credit for it, and I was like, okay, so clearly like you're obviously not insane, and it's not possessed by demons because you chose, you're like, you know what, that pissed me off, like screw you guys, guess what, I'm back bitches. Like, so it's kind of, I don't know, he contradicts himself like quite a bit. So um and then July 21st of this year, 2023, so just a few short weeks ago, Rader compared himself to the Gilgo Beach murder suspect In a letter to Fox News Digital, Rader compares himself to the Gilgo Beach murderer suspect Rex Heuermann, calling him a clone of myself based on the similarities of their case. Heuermann was arrested and charged with 6 counts of murder in connection to the death of 3 women. So, I don't know when Rex Heuermann's crimes were committed, but he did, if we do kind of recall, he mentions in his article that, for them to say, yeah, it's going to be fine, we can communicate without talking. His message and the title he wanted was Rex, it will be okay. So he clearly
Yeah, so he
looked
was
up
like
pretty highly
directly
to,
talking to him or
yeah,
directly associated with him.
yeah. So that is like his timeline of events. I don't know. Okay, I was like, what is happening here? All right. So who was BTK? BTK, Dennis Lynn Rader, was born March 9th, 1945, and was best known as BTK, which is an abbreviation that he gave himself for bind, torture, kill. He's an American serial killer who murdered 10 people in Wichita and the Wichita suburb of Park City between the years 1974 and 1991. He would often send police and members of the media taunting letters, which would lead to his eventual arrest in 2005 and his subsequent guilty plea. He is currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. So if we get into his background a little bit, he was born March 9th, 1945, to Dorothea May Rader and William Elvin Rader. He's the oldest of 4 boys. He was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas, although he grew up in Wichita. Both his parents were known to, work long hours and the kids were kind of on their own. So he felt that he was ignored by his parents, but his mother more in particular, and he resented his parents for not giving him the attention that he should have got as a child. So as a result, from a young age, he harbored a lot of sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing helpless women. He also exhibited something called zoosadism by torturing, killing, and hanging small animals. He was known to have a lot of sadistic tendencies. He
That's not
later,
surprising.
what's her?
That's not surprising.
Yeah, if you kind of look at the history of a lot of serial killers and stuff, it usually will start with
Animal
violent
torture.
crimes with small animals and yeah, animal torture and stuff. So he also acted out on many sexual fetishes, voyeurism, autoerotic asphyxiation, and cross-dressing. He would often spy on female neighbors while dressed as a woman, including underwear that he had stolen um, from his victims. And he would masturbate with ropes and other bindings around his arms and necks. Many years later, during what was referred to as his cooling off periods between his murders, he would take pictures of himself wearing women's clothing and a female mask while bound. He later admitted to be um, he later admitted that he was pretending to be his victims as part of a sexual fantasy. Um, However, he kept his sexual proclivities well hidden and was widely regarded in his community as a normal, polite, and well-mannered gentleman. Rader graduated from Wichita Heights High School. He attended Kansas Wesleyan University. He reached average, all right grades, but not great. He dropped out after a year. He served in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970. After his discharge, he moved to the suburbs of Park City, where he worked in the meat department of an IGA supermarket, where his mother worked as a bookkeeper. He married Paula Dietz on May 22nd, 1971. They had 2 children, Carrie and Brian. He attended Butler County Community College in El Dorado, earning an associate's degree in electronics in 1973. He then enrolled at Wichita State University and graduated in 1979 with a Bachelor's of Science degree, majoring in Administration of Justice. Rader initially worked as an assembler in the Coleman Company, so his first few murders, his first 5 murders were former coworkers and their families, which is where the Coleman Company kind of was important. an outdoor supply company. He then worked at the Wichita-based office of ADT Security Services from 1974 to 1988. So pretty much like the entire span of his crimes, he was working for a security service where he would install security cameras and security alarms as part of his job. In many cases, the homeowners' concerns were concerned about the BTK killings and had alarms installed. So people would call them wanting alarms installed because of the BTK, killings and stuff going on around them. But little did they know they had BTK in their homes installing their security alarms to protect them from him.
Yeah, there's a few episodes in Corona Mines where they definitely had things like this. Like I remember the one that gets Spencer addicted to Dilaudid. He ended up having multiple personality disorder, but he was he worked for a security company, and so he would do tech support for people, and so he was able to get into their computers that would have like the cameras in them, and so he was able
Yeah,
to watch them, and like he would like live streamed him killing them. It was crazy. Like it kind of reminds me of
yeah,
that a lot.
yeah. So we're gonna get there. So
Nice,
um,
nice.
Rader was then a census field operations supervisor for the Wichita area in 1989 before the 1990 federal census. In May of 91, he became a dog catcher and a compliance officer in Park City, which took up a lot of his day-to-day time, which is why he fell off the map, was because he was a compliance officer in Park City. So that took up a lot of his time and he kind of just, dropped off BTK dropped off the map as a result of how busy he was in his day-to-day life as a compliance officer. In his position, neighbors recalled him as being sometimes overzealous and extremely strict, as well as taking pleasure in bullying and harassing single women. One neighbor complained that he had euthanized her dog for absolutely no reason. Rader was a member of the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita and had been elected the president of the church council, and he was also a Cub Scout leader. So he would teach young boys different knots that he would use in his killings and
Oh,
would work with young kids, and that just makes me cringe and knowing knowing that.
yeah.
Um
That's the exact person you
so
want teaching your kids.
yeah, it's like the last verse, and that's kind of like another story that reminds me of how there's a murder that happened in London, Ontario, the murder happened at a Christmas party, where the guy was shot over a what I believe was this very small, insignificant drug debt of roughly around 25 to like $40 was kind of mentioned in different articles about it. And the killer is now free after only serving around like 10 to 12 years, whatever it was. And he then moved out west and lives in Alberta or British Columbia and teaches kids to fight and has like a fighting club out there that he teaches kids to fight. And I just don't understand how
He's able to work with
anybody
children.
could allow a murderer to work and teach kids to fight and stuff. And I don't know if you know what case I'm talking about.
No, I don't. But I mean,
Okay, so this is actually the case of our cousin Jeff. So our cousin Jeff was murdered at a Christmas party back in, I want to say it was around 2006. And his killer is now out of prison and is running a fighting club, a boxing club out in Western Canada. Um, and I don't see how he should be walking free, um, and allowed to teach kids to fight and to just teach that kind of stuff in general or work around kids.
I had no idea that our cousin got murdered.
Yeah. Nanny's sister Blanche, it was her son.
Oh shit.
Uh, Yeah, so he was around, I want to say he was around my age when he was killed, or possibly younger. And then his sister passed away the following year. So um, not even a few months apart, she had lost both her kids. So, but yeah, our cousin Jeff was murdered over a $20 or $25 drug debt that someone owed him money for, and the person left the party and came back with somebody that he didn't know, and he was shot and killed. Um, so it just reminds me a lot of that story. When you talk about that kind of thing,
Yeah. Some people are
So
just so petty. Like that's like literally not even $50.
yeah, like someone's life is not worth $50, but I mean that's obviously my view on things, and it might be a case that we kind of cover later. There's not a crazy amount of information because again, Canadian history and stuff, but um, yeah, so it might be a case we cover. I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, so July 26th of 2005, after Rader was arrested, his wife was granted an emergency divorce, which usually divorces take at least 60 days to process, but she was granted an emergency divorce. And in an interview with ABC News in 2019, Carrie, his daughter, said that she still writes to him in prison and she forgives him, but still struggles to reconcile with him, with the BTK killer, stating her childhood seemed normal and that they were just a normal American family. So she has forgiven him for everything pretty much, but she still just can't fathom that her dad was BTK. Um,
Which I mean,
but
rightfully so.
she, which like rightfully so, but she also has forgiven him. So like she's okay with everything that you know what I mean? Like she's
Yeah,
kind of
I
come to
mean,
terms with it, but
yeah, I wouldn't
kind
say
through
that.
something you'll be okay with, but just
I wouldn't
I don't know.
say she's okay with it. I think she just like it's her dad, right? Like it is blood related, and like eventually you have to like. I don't know if I would ever say like, you know what, like I forgive you, but um it is also blood, and if he did raise her right and everything like that, like it's like
Yeah,
you almost feel like your entire childhood was a lie, and maybe she's saying like I forgive you for basically ruining her childhood after her childhood was over. Like
yeah, for sure.
it could not even
Um,
be because of the crimes at all.
yeah, no, for sure. And so, anyways, he is currently serving his uh sentence at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. He is not eligible for release before February 26th, 2180. So he will never get out of prison, because that's the earliest that he's eligible to get out of prison, which would put him at being 235 years old at his earliest possible release. So
Yeah, I
he
mean he did.
definitely will never make it out. So I
Yeah.
did the math on that one. He isn't held in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, only allowed out for yard exercise 1 hour a day, and he is only allowed to shower 3 times a week. Through his good behavior, he's been allowed to gain a few privileges, such as, have access to television, radio, and magazines. He's currently 78 years old. Um, he also had a habit of nicknaming his home invasion plans in a manner similar to military operations. So when he called when he killed Catherine Bright, her home invasion plan name was Project Lights Out. Vicky Wegerly's murder was called Project Piano because he liked listening to her play the piano. Um, After the murder of Dolores Davis, the FBI profiler John Douglas assumed that he had either been arrested or died. When the BTK killer began communicating again, the BAU developed a strategy to keep him talking by issuing press releases, so that he would take the bait, so that they could eventually kind of catch him in something, because obviously we knew how much attention that he wanted, and he wanted people to know like that he was the killer. He didn't want them to know who he was, but just that he was responsible for it. And he got obviously kind of like a high almost out of knowing that they're still talking about him and they're getting him the attention and stuff.
Yeah.
And, uh,
And
and he took the bait and ran with it, and as a result, it got him caught.
I mean, yeah. I know that a lot of the times like people will hold press conferences and they'll purposely get things wrong just to annoy them.
Yeah,
For them to call and be like, "Yo, you're so stupid." Like
you
that's
actually no.
clearly
This
not
is
what happened.
actually what. Yeah, this is actually what happened. Um, so then when we talk about media and like BTK, he was actually referenced in 16 separate episodes of Criminal Minds and was the inspiration for many episodes over the course of the show's, I was going to say runtime, but Criminal Minds is still an active show. So 12 episodes, they actually refer to him by name. And the other 4 episodes, they don't refer to him by name, but he is like the kind of
The influence.
the influence on um, that case, but also, yeah, like they don't refer to him by name, but they kind of like hint at him, but they just don't ever flat out say his name in those 4 episodes.
Yeah.
And then he was also referenced in one episode of Criminal Minds Beyond the Borders.
Right.
So in total, he has been referenced. Like there's a Criminal Minds episode where I don't quite remember the episode, but I think it's early in like either season 1 or season 2, possibly, where there's an episode called ETK, Electrocute, Torture, and Kill,
I remember
instead
that
of
one.
BTK.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's that one as well. And then so Stephen King also wrote a novel called A Good Marriage, and there's also a film based on that novel, which is inspired by the BTK Killer. There's also a novelist, Thomas Harris, that said his character of Francis Dollarhide in 1981's novel Red Dragon is partially based on the then unidentified BTK killer. There's also an episode 4 of season 6, Law and Order Special Victims Unit, is based on the BTK case. Episode 15 of season 1 is based on Rader's murders. There's also a case, um, episode 1 of season 2 on the Netflix series Catching Killers, which talks about his crimes and his case. There's also a Netflix series based on him called Mindhunter.
Oh, apparently that's really good.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. Definitely one I want to see because, like I said, I don't know what it is about this case, but it just really has like really captivated my attention, and just kind of the things that he's done and stuff is just crazy. But it's so interesting to see like his thought process and his motive behind it, kind of thing. And it's yeah, and then there's also a movie named BTK. It's kind of like a half biopic and half fictionalized account of the murders. And then there's also a couple other movies. The Clove Hitch Killer was inspired by Dennis Rader. There's also a song called BTK from a thrash metal band, Exodus, for their album Blood In, Blood Out, which was inspired by his crime history. And there's also a song called Raider 2 from Steve Wilson's album Grace for Drowning, and it is primarily about his murders. So he's covered in a lot of different things. I mean, the case is so well known and so out there, but
Yeah, there's
yeah.
I just like looked it up on the side because I was just like I'm pretty sure it was, but in Riverdale, um Betty ends up becoming an FBI agent like through their time jump, and her main investigation was on somebody called TBK, which is called the Trash Bag Killer, and his name is literally his alias is literally TBK and Dennis, so it's like almost like literally cut and paste. The only difference is that he wore a trash bag and like he suffocated people only using trash bags, and like And it's just like it's literally a like cut and dry like case of the BTK.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
but yeah, it was just another thing that he was also kind of in.
yeah, so that ETK Criminal Minds episode was season 3. It was the actual episode name was Limelight. But season 4, there's literally 4 episodes in season 4 that are about BTK, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like a direct correlation, but I know that there's one episode where Hotch and Reed go to the prison because apparently, like, I don't know why, but they went there, and the guy looks exactly like an older version of BTK, like of Dennis Rader, because he has the same mustache and everything, same stature. And I don't know if he was meant to be BTK or not, but like they were like talking to him while he was already in prison though. So like I don't know if they were just trying to say like if he was to have been caught like a long time ago, like this could have been a scenario that played out between them. But
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not sure. I didn't really like read too much into like um
the episodes or anything.
the the kind of the episode like kind of synopsis, but
It might not even
anyways.
be completely correlated with him. It was just like
Yeah,
he
that's what I'm
looks a
saying. Like
lot
it
like
just
Dennis
there's
Rader, so
yeah, it is possible. I mean, and there's just so many um yeah, like there's even a whole episode where Hotch compares like the Reaper to Radar and the
mm-hmm.
Zodiac Killer. So like there's just a lot of kind of
Yeah.
things.
I was thinking of of him the entire time that like you were doing like you were talking about like the course of events. Like, oh yeah, he gave this
Hmm.
hiatus and then he randomly came back and it was like and I was like, I swear to God, if Madison says that oh it's because he randomly cut a deal with some random police officer, I'm gonna lose my shit.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird. Like I understand it was a control thing, but like that episode of Criminal Minds, like because he wanted to be noticed and to have attention, I'm surprised that he would allow like the hiatus for so long and like when it comes to like the TV show.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe it's just to separate him from the actual BTK.
Yeah. Again, like I don't
Yet again,
fully know.
it makes for a good story on TV, so that could also be why.
It definitely does. And I mean there's just so much to the case that like I could easily go on for this for hours. Like there's just so much about Dennis Rader and like he had so many different aliases too, like that he was known by. Like he was also known by Ethan Truman, Hap Hakeman, Bill Thomas Kilman, which is the name that he used when he sent postcards and things and communicated with the police. He was also known as the BTK Strangler, the BTK Killer. He self named himself the Wichita Strangler. He also self named himself the Poetic Strangler because he would send some poems to potential victims as well as the police. The Asphyxiator, also a name that he gave himself. The Garrote Phantom, self-named. The Bondage Strangler, self-named, and the Wichita Hangman, all names that he gave himself. Um, which is just crazy. Yeah, so he killed 10. There was 4 plus that he also intended to kill, but didn't kill. 3 people that he stalked, and 1 attempted murder that he was not successful with, which was the brother that he had shot in the head, but he managed to somehow survive.
Well,
Yeah.
did it say where he was shot in the head? I'm just curious.
I didn't see, like, it didn't really detail, it just said he somehow managed to, survive. I'm just trying to see if I can quickly find it. Yeah, it just says shot twice in the head with a 22 caliber.
Mm.
So, and he survived. Which, I mean, a 22 caliber is one of those, like, will cause damage and obviously can kill at the right, you know,
Yeah,
spot, but it's definitely not one that's commonly known for, killing people or for murder. It's not like usually a weapon of choice by no means
fair.
in, in killers, so with killers.
I also just want to throw it out there that he's a Pisces.
Okay, sure.
Very emotional and based completely on emotions. I'm not surprised that he's an attention seeker. I mean, most serial killers are because like why else would they? But he is a Pisces, which is one of the most common signs for serial killers to have. Which I'm not going to go into that, but I've
Okay.
but like most serial killers fall within four distinct astrological signs. At least the
Fair,
most
fair.
prolific ones. So
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I don't obviously I'm not super into astrological stuff, so that's all EU.
yeah, it's a me thing for sure. But I mean, we're both like Virgos and Geminis are both 2 out of the 4.
Anyways, I think that's a wrap for today. I honestly like was not expecting there to be that much for Bloody Mary. I was like, damn, like
If you ever want to get in contact with us, you can email us at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram at worstcasemacchiato. We are available for streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, just your the mainstream podcast platforms. But you can let us know about any updates on cases, or if we got something possibly wrong in our notes, just let us know and we'll look into it and address it in the following episode. Or if you just want to suggest a case that you would like us to cover in the future, just let us know on one of those platforms and we will get around to answering everyone that we can. All right, and I hope you have a great day and we'll see you in the next one.